Let me tell you about the worst seat I ever chose. It was in the Great Mating Convergence Hall in Dracarun. I thought I was sitting next to some high-ranking guard. Quiet guy. Covered in scars and black armor. Didn't say much. Until the entire kingdom stood to honor him. That's when I realized I'd just accidentally sat beside the most dangerous man in the realm. And he'd already caught my scent. The kingdom of Dracarun wasn't the kind of place you stumbled into by accident. It was a realm carved from volcanic stone and ancient fire, where wolves and humans lived side by side but never quite trusted one another. The capital rose from blackened rock, its towers reaching towards storm-gray skies, its streets lit by braziers that burned day and night. The air always smelled of smoke and pine, and the ground beneath your feet hummed with a heat that never went away. Once every generation, the kingdom gathered for the Great Mating Convergence. It was the most sacred night in all of Dracarun, a ceremony steeped in tradition and power. Under the light of fire braziers and the watchful eyes of the moon priests, eligible wolves would meet their destined mates. Only pure-blooded wolves were invited. Only those with noble lineage and recognized status had earned the right to stand in that throne hall and wait for fate to choose them. I, Lysandra Hellwing, had absolutely no business being there. I was a half-wolf. My mother had been a strong she-wolf from a lesser pack, but my father was human, and he'd left when I was too young to remember his face. That mix of blood made me an outsider in both worlds. The wolves didn't fully accept me because my blood wasn't pure. The humans feared me because I carried the wolf inside. So I'd learned to keep my head down, to live quietly in the Frostwood outskirts, surrounded by books and solitude. I worked as a scholar, documenting old pack histories and translating ancient texts. It was peaceful, safe, invisible, exactly how I liked it. But my best friend Evelyn had other ideas. Evelyn was everything I wasn't. She was noble-born, confident, and absolutely radiant. Her family had ties to the inner court, and when she'd been chosen as one of the honored maidens for the convergence, she'd been over the moon with excitement. She'd also refused to go without me. "Lysandra, you have to come," she'd begged, gripping my hands in hers, her green eyes sparkling. "I need you there, just for support. You won't have to do anything. Just sit quietly in the back. No one will even notice you." I'd tried to refuse. I'd listed all the reasons why it was a terrible idea. But Evelyn had a way of wearing you down with her enthusiasm, and in the end I'd agreed. Just this once. Just to support her. I promised myself I'd stay invisible. The throne hall was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was massive, with stone pillars stretching up toward a vaulted ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Every pillar was carved with glowing runes, ancient symbols that pulsed with a faint golden light. Crimson and black banners hung from the rafters, each one embroidered with the royal wolf sigil. Fire braziers lined the walls, roaring with flames that cast everything in shades of orange and amber. The heat was almost unbearable, pressing against my skin like a living thing. Hundreds of wolves filled the hall. Warriors in ceremonial armor stood at attention along the walls, their eyes sharp and watchful. Nobles draped in furs and silk clustered in groups, whispering and laughing. The honored maidens, including Evelyn, were gathered near the front, each one dressed in flowing gowns that shimmered in the firelight. I felt completely out of place. I kept my head down and pushed through the crowd, trying not to draw attention. My plain dress and simple cloak marked me as someone who didn't belong, and I could feel the curious stares following me. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, to turn around and disappear back into the safety of the forest. But I'd made a promise to Evelyn. I spotted an empty bench near the side of the hall, tucked slightly in shadow. It was perfect. Out of the way. Quiet. I could sit there and watch the ceremony without anyone noticing me. I slipped onto the bench quickly, letting out a breath of relief. That's when I realized someone was already sitting there. A man. Silent. Enormous. He sat at the far end of the bench, his posture perfectly still. He was draped in black iron armor that looked like it had been forged in the fires of the hall itself, every plate engraved with intricate silver wolf designs. A thick fur cloak hung from his shoulders, so dark it seemed to swallow the light. His hair fell in dark braids around his face, some tied with leather cords, others loose. A brutal scar cut across his left cheekbone, pale against his tanned skin. His hands rested on his knees, gloved and perfectly still. He didn't look at me. Didn't acknowledge me. He just sat there, radiating a kind of quiet, controlled danger that made my wolf instincts prickle with awareness. I assumed he was one of the king's personal guard. Someone important but not so important that sitting near him would cause a problem. He seemed content to be left alone, and that suited me perfectly. So I stayed, quiet, hoping to remain invisible. Then the horns blew. The sound was deafening. Deep and primal, it echoed off the stone walls and shook the very air. The fires in the braziers roared to life, the flames shooting upward, doubling in size. The heat became almost unbearable, and the entire hall was bathed in blinding orange light. And then, as one, every single person in the throne hall rose to their feet. Warriors straightened to attention. Nobles placed fists over their hearts. The honored maidens bowed their heads. The moon priests raised their staffs. Hundreds of wolves stood in perfect, reverent silence. Every single person, except me, and the man beside me. My stomach dropped. Panic surged through me as I realized my mistake. I started to stand, my legs shaking, but it was too late. The whispers had already started. Why hasn't she risen? Who is that girl? She's sitting beside him. The fiery Alpha King Astrid is seated. Why hasn't she risen? My blood turned to ice. My heart stopped beating. Slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water, I turned my head to look at the man beside me. And he turned to look at me. Golden eyes, burning like molten fire. Sharp and predatory and impossibly intense. His nostrils flared, his jaw tightened. Every muscle in his body seemed to coil with restrained power. The entire hall fell into a suffocating silence. He leaned in, just slightly, and inhaled. Deep, deliberate, as though he couldn't help himself. His brows drew together, confusion flickering across his brutal, scarred face. Then something else, something darker, hungrier, more dangerous. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. Who are you? I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't move. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. His golden eyes burned into mine, and I knew with absolute certainty that my life had just changed forever. Who are you? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. His golden eyes never left mine, burning with an intensity that made my skin prickle. The entire throne hall remained frozen in silence, hundreds of wolves watching us with bated breath. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed up. My heart hammered so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Finally, I managed to force out a whisper. I'm no one. His eyes narrowed. He leaned in closer, and I watched his nostrils flare as he inhaled again, deeper this time. More deliberate. His brows drew together in confusion, then something that looked almost like frustration crossed his scarred face. No one does not smell like this. The whispers erupted around us like wildfire. I could feel hundreds of eyes boring into me, could hear the rustle of fabric as nobles leaned toward each other to share their shock. My cheeks burned with humiliation and fear. This was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid. This attention, this scrutiny, this danger. Across the hall I caught sight of Evelyn. Her face was pale, her green eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. She stood frozen among the other honored maidens, her hand pressed to her mouth. King Astrid straightened slightly, but he didn't move away from me. If anything, he seemed to shift closer, his massive frame blocking out everything else in my vision. Your name, he said again, his voice low and commanding. It wasn't a question this time. It was an order. Lysandra, I breathed out. Lysandra Hellwing. Hellwing. He tested the name on his tongue as though searching his memory for it. I don't know that family. You wouldn't, I said quickly, my words tumbling over themselves. We're from the Frostwood outskirts. We're nobody. I'm nobody. Stop saying that. His voice carried an edge now, sharp enough to cut. Where do you come from? What is your lineage? Panic clawed at my chest. This was the question I'd dreaded my entire life. The question that would expose me for what I really was. Half-blood, impure, unwanted. My mother was from the Greymane pack, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. A lesser pack, nothing important. And your father? I swallowed hard. The lie stuck in my throat, But the truth was even more dangerous. He left when I was young. Astrid's eyes studied me with an intensity that made me feel stripped bare. He inhaled again, and I saw his jaw tighten, the muscles in his neck tensing. Something was bothering him, something he couldn't understand. My half-wolf blood was supposed to be unnoticeable. I'd spent years learning to suppress my scent, to blend in, to hide what I was. No one had ever detected it before. No one had ever questioned me. But this man, this king, he was sensing something that didn't make sense to him, and that made him dangerous. I needed to get away from him. Away from his burning gaze and his questions and the way he kept scenting the air around me like I was a puzzle he needed to solve. I started to stand, my legs shaking beneath me. His hand shot out and caught my wrist. Not roughly, not violently, but with an instinctive certainty that froze me in place. His gloved fingers wrapped around my wrist firmly, and I felt the heat of his touch even through the leather. Stay. That single word echoed through the throne hall like a thunderclap. It reverberated off the stone walls, through the stunned silence, through my very bones. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even really a command. It was something deeper, something primal. I stared at him, my breath caught in my throat. His golden eyes held mine, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. There was only him, only his hand on my wrist. Only the impossible pull I felt toward him that made no sense at all. The ceremony continued around us, but I barely registered it. The moon priests began their chants. The honored maidens were presented. The fire braziers roared and danced, but Astrid never looked away from me. He sat there, unreadable, unmoving, his presence burning like a restrained fire. And I sat beside him, terrified and confused, unable to understand what was happening. When the formalities finally concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Evelyn appeared at my side like a whirlwind. She grabbed my arm and practically dragged me away from the bench, away from the king, toward a quieter corner of the hall. Lysandra. Her voice was frantic, her grip on my arm almost painful. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I didn't mean to, I stammered. I didn't know. I thought he was just a guard, I swear. A guard? Evelyn's eyes were wild. Lysandra, you sat beside him. You sat beside the fiery Alpha King. No one sits beside him. Not his generals, not his advisors, not even the highest nobles in the kingdom. That seat has been empty for as long as anyone can remember. My stomach dropped. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? And he scented you. Evelyn's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Did you see the way he looked at you? The way he kept inhaling? Everyone saw it, Lysandra. Everyone. The implications of her words crashed over me like a wave. Around us, I could hear the whispers spreading like poison through the crowd. Who is she? Why did the king react to her scent? Is she someone important? Could she be dangerous? I heard she's from some unknown pack in the outskirts. Half-blood, I bet. That last whisper made my blood run cold. If they discovered the truth about my heritage, if they found out what I really was, I would be in even more danger than I already faced. I looked across the hall and found him immediately. Astrid stood among his generals now, a head taller than most of them, his black armor gleaming in the firelight. But he wasn't looking at his men, he was looking at me. His golden eyes tracked me through the crowd with an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness. He watched me for the entire remainder of the ceremony. Unreadable, unmoving, burning with a restrained intensity that I could feel from across the room. When the last of the rituals concluded and the crowd began to thin, I knew I had to escape. I couldn't stay here. Couldn't face more questions, couldn't endure more of those burning golden eyes following my every move. I slipped away from Evelyn, ignoring her protests, and found my way out of the throne hall. The cool night air hit my face like a blessing, and I gulped it down gratefully. The palace courtyard was lit by torches, their flames dancing in the breeze. I found a quiet corner near a stone wall and pressed my back against it, trying to steady my racing heart. I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate, unmistakable. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. You ran. Astrid's voice came from somewhere behind me, low and rough. I needed air. I said without turning. You needed to escape me. I had no answer to that because it was true. I heard him move closer, And then he was standing beside me, his presence overwhelming even in the open air. We stood in silence for a long moment, both staring out at the torchlit courtyard. "I don't believe in destiny," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I don't believe in mates or fate or any of the stories the moon priests tell." I stayed silent, not knowing what to say. "But something about your scent," he trailed off, and I heard him inhale again as though he couldn't help himself. "It's tormenting me. I can't stop thinking about it. About you." My heart pounded. "Please," I whispered, "please stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm something you need to solve. Like I'm something you need to claim." He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face me fully, and I had no choice but to meet his eyes. Those burning, golden, impossible eyes. "I can't," he whispered. And in that moment I knew that everything had changed, that there was no going back to my quiet, invisible life. That this man, this king, had already decided something about me, something I didn't understand, something that terrified me, something that, against all reason, made my wolf stir inside me for the first time in years. The morning after the convergence, I woke to the sound of whispers outside my door. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying every moment from the night before, the way Astrid had looked at me, the way he'd held my wrist, the way he'd said he couldn't stop. My wolf had been restless all night, pacing inside my chest like a caged animal, and I didn't understand why. When I finally forced myself out of bed and dressed, I opened the door to find two servants in the hallway. They stopped talking the moment they saw me, their faces flushing with embarrassment before they hurried away. But I'd heard enough. Firebane. The word echoed in my mind as I made my way through the palace corridors. I tried to convince myself I'd misheard, that they were talking about something else, but deep down I knew better. I was walking toward the guest quarters when I heard it again. Two noble women stood near a window, their silk gowns rustling as they leaned close to whisper. They didn't notice me approaching. "The half-bloodstain thinks she can sit beside the king," one of them hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Cursed," the other replied. "That's what she is. Did you see how the fires flared when she was near him?" "It's unnatural." My steps faltered. I wanted to turn around to run, but my legs felt frozen. The women finally noticed me, their eyes widening before they quickly turned away, their whispers growing quieter but not stopping. I hurried past them, my cheeks burning with humiliation. This was exactly what I'd feared, exactly why I'd spent my whole life trying to stay invisible. But now everyone saw me. Everyone knew who I was, and they were calling me cursed. I found Evelyn in her chambers, and the moment she saw my face, she pulled me inside and closed the door. "I've been hearing things," she said, her green eyes worried. "Terrible things. They're saying you're dangerous, Lysandra. They're calling you Firebane." "I know," I whispered, sinking into a chair. "I heard them." Evelyn knelt beside me, taking my hands in hers. "Listen to me carefully. If Astrid truly scented a bond with you, if what happened at the convergence was real, the elders will never allow it. I don't understand what you mean." "The High Circle," she said urgently. "The elders who advise the king. They've controlled the throne from the shadows for generations. They choose who has power and who doesn't. And they will never ever allow a half-blood girl to threaten their influence over the king." Fear coiled in my stomach. I don't want to threaten anyone. I just want to go home. To disappear again. "It's too late for that." Her grip on my hands tightened. "He's already noticed you, and that means you're in danger. Real danger." Before I could respond, a sharp knock came at the door. Evelyn reluctantly stood and opened it to reveal a royal guard, his face impassive and formal. "Lysandra Hellwing," he said, his voice echoing in the small room. "The king requests your presence in the Eastern Library. Immediately." My heart dropped into my stomach. Evelyn shot me a worried look, but there was nothing I could do. "You didn't refuse a summons from the king." I followed the guard through the winding corridors of the palace, my mind racing. What did Astrid want? Why couldn't he just leave me alone? Every moment I spent near him only made things worse, only drew more attention, only put me in more danger. I tried to think of ways to avoid him, to make excuses, to delay. Maybe if I walked slowly enough he would give up and leave. Maybe he would realize this was all a mistake and forget about me. But when I finally reached the Eastern Library, a massive room filled with ancient books and scrolls that stretched from floor to ceiling, he was there, waiting. Astrid stood by a tall window, the afternoon light streaming through and casting his shadow long across the stone floor. He was dressed more simply than at the convergence, but he was no less imposing. His black tunic stretched across his broad shoulders, and his dark hair fell loose around his face. When he turned and those golden eyes locked on mine, I felt my breath catch in my throat. "You tried to avoid me," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I thought it would be better," I admitted, staying near the doorway. Better for whom? I had no answer to that. Better for everyone, maybe. Better for the kingdom that was already whispering about me. Better for the elders who clearly wanted me gone. Better for him, because associating with someone like me could only damage his rule. He crossed the room slowly, deliberately, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. He stopped just a few feet away from me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell the smoke and pine that seemed to cling to his clothes. "I need answers, Lysandra." "I don't have any," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand what's happening any more than you do." "You're sent," he said, his voice rough with frustration. "It's driving me mad. I can't think, can't focus on my duties. Every time I close my eyes, I smell you. Every time I try to concentrate on matters of state. On the council meetings and border reports, my mind drifts back to you sitting beside me in that hall." "I'm sorry," I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to cause you trouble." "Sorry?" He stepped closer, and I could see the intensity burning in his eyes. "I don't want your apologies. I want to understand why my wolf is howling for you. Why every instinct I have is screaming at me to keep you close. To protect you. To claim you?" That last word hung between us, dangerous and electric. I felt my pulse racing, felt my own wolf stirring inside me in response to his words. "You can't," I said, shaking my head desperately. "You heard what they're calling me, Firebane. Cursed, half-bloodstain. I'm not worthy of you. I'm not worthy of any of this." "Let me decide what you're worthy of." He reached out and took my hand, and the moment his skin touched mine, something crackled between us. A spark. A pull. Something ancient and undeniable that made my wolf surge inside my chest with a force that took my breath away. I saw Astrid's eyes widen, saw his breathing quicken. He felt it too. I knew he did. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice filled with wonder and confusion. "I don't know," I breathed, staring at our joined hands, but we both felt it. The bond, crackling and alive between us, stronger than anything I'd ever experienced. It terrified me and drew me in all at once. And I knew, standing there in that library with his hand in mine, that nothing would ever be the same again. The news came at dawn 3 days later. I was in the gardens, trying to clear my head after another sleepless night, when I heard the commotion, soldiers running, servants whispering urgently, the sound of horses being prepared in the stables. Something was wrong. I found a servant and asked what was happening, my heart already pounding with dread. "Rogue wolves," the woman said, her face pale. "They've taken the fortress at Iron Peak, killed the entire garrison. The king is riding out within the hour to crush them." My chest tightened with an emotion I didn't want to name. Fear. Not for myself, but for him. I told myself it was foolish. He was the fiery Alpha King, legendary for his strength and skill in battle. He'd conquered territories and defeated enemies that would make lesser wolves run. He didn't need my concern. He probably wouldn't even think about me with war on the horizon, but I couldn't stop the worry that coiled in my stomach like a living thing. The palace erupted into controlled chaos around me. I saw generals striding toward the war room, their faces grim. Soldiers in full armor gathered in the courtyards. Supply wagons were being loaded with weapons and provisions. I stood frozen in the garden, not knowing what to do, when I heard footsteps behind me. I knew it was him before I turned around. I could feel his presence like heat against my back. Astrid stood there in full battle armor. Black iron plates were strapped across his chest and shoulders, each one engraved with intricate wolf designs. A massive sword was belted at his waist, and his dark hair had been pulled back from his face. He looked every inch the warrior king, fierce and powerful and ready for war. But his eyes, when they met mine, held something softer, something almost vulnerable. "I leave within the hour," he said, his voice low. I heard. My voice came out quieter than I intended, barely more than a whisper. He stepped closer, and I noticed the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. This wasn't just another battle for him. Something about it unsettled him, though I couldn't imagine what could unsettle a man like him. "You unsettle me?" he said, as though reading my thoughts. "From the moment you sat beside me, everything in my world has been tilted. I can't think straight, can't plan clearly. My generals ask me questions about strategy and troop movements, and I have to force myself to focus because all I can think about is you." "I'm sorry," I whispered again, because I didn't know what else to say. "You confuse me," he continued, taking another step closer until I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "I've never believed in fate. Never believed in the mate bond. I thought it was just a story told to cubs to give them hope, to make them believe in something larger than themselves. But now," he trailed off, his golden eyes searching my face as though trying to memorize every detail. "Now I can't deny what I feel when I'm near you." My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. "What do you feel?" "Like you're pulling at me," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "Like there's a thread tied around my soul and you're holding the other end. I've fought battles that would break most men, conquered territories that seemed impossible, faced enemies that would make experienced warriors flee. But you terrify me in a way nothing else ever has. You shouldn't want me," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm nobody. I'm half-blood. I'm everything the elders say I am. Wanting me will only bring you trouble. It will only make things harder for you." Astrid reached out and cupped my face in his rough, calloused hand. The touch sent electricity racing through my skin, made my wolf howl with recognition inside my chest. "Wanting you is not a choice," he said, his voice low and fierce. "It is a fire, and I am burning." Then he dropped his hand and stepped back, his expression hardening as duty called him away from whatever was building between us. "I don't know when I'll return," he said, his voice returning to that of a commanding king. "The rebellion must be crushed quickly before it spreads to other territories. But Lysandra," he paused, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "Stay here, stay in the palace. Stay safe." "I will," I promised, though I didn't know why I was making that promise or why it seemed so important. Then he was gone, his black cloak sweeping behind him as he strode away toward the waiting soldiers and the war that called him north. I stood alone in the garden, my hand pressed to the cheek he'd touched, my mind reeling from everything he'd said. I thought his absence would give me peace. That with him gone I could think clearly again, could figure out what to do, could maybe even slip away and return to my quiet life in Frostwood where none of this madness existed. But I discovered the opposite. I missed him. The realization hit me that first night as I lay awake in my borrowed room, staring at the ceiling. I missed his presence, his intensity, even the way he'd looked at me like I was a puzzle he needed to solve. My wolf paced restlessly inside me, anxious and agitated in a way she'd never been before. I found myself standing at the palace gates during the day, staring north toward where he'd gone, as though I could will him back safely through sheer force of wanting. I listened to every report that came back from the border, my heart jumping at each mention of the king's army. I feared for him in a way that made no sense. I barely knew him. We'd spoken only a handful of times. He was the king, powerful and fierce and surrounded by the best warriors in the kingdom. He didn't need my worry, but I worried anyway. And worse, I questioned myself constantly. Why did I feel this way about him? Why did my skin still tingle where he'd touched my face? Why did my wolf respond to him when I'd spent years keeping that part of myself buried and controlled? Evelyn found me one evening in the palace library, sitting at a table with a book open in front of me that I wasn't actually reading. "You miss him," she said gently, sliding into the chair beside me. It wasn't a question. I didn't bother denying it. "Is that wrong?" "No," she said softly. "It's just dangerous." 3 days after Astrid left, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. I'd been walking through one of the administrative wings of the palace, lost in thought about Astrid and the bond and everything that had happened. I wasn't paying attention to where I was going until I noticed a door slightly ajar. Through the opening, I could see stacks of parchment and leather-bound ledgers. Curious, and needing something to distract my mind, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. It was a records room. Council documents covered every surface. Supply requisitions, tax records, village reports, all the boring administrative details that kept a kingdom running. I knew I shouldn't be there, but something caught my eye. A ledger that didn't quite match the others, its binding newer, its pages less worn. I pulled it from the shelf and opened it, running my finger down the columns of numbers, and then I froze. The numbers were wrong. Supplies meant for the northern villages, grain and medicine and building materials, the amounts listed as delivered didn't match the amounts that had supposedly been purchased. Hundreds of pounds of grain simply missing from the records, vanished without explanation. My heart began to pound. I set that ledger aside and pulled another one. More discrepancies. Funds allocated for border defenses, detailed payment records, but I'd traveled through the northern territories before, and I'd never seen the defenses these documents claimed had been built. I opened more documents, my hands shaking now as the pattern became clearer. Forged signatures on requisition forms, altered dates on supply orders. Records that had been carefully, meticulously changed to hide something big. Someone was stealing from the kingdom. Someone inside the palace was diverting supplies meant for villages and soldiers. Someone was forging documents and covering their tracks. Someone was committing treason. And as I stood there, surrounded by evidence of corruption, I realized with cold certainty that I was the only one who had noticed the pattern. The only one who had put the pieces together. Which meant I was also the only one in danger if the people responsible discovered what I knew. I carefully replaced the ledgers exactly as I'd found them, my mind racing. Who could I tell? Who could I trust? Astrid was gone, fighting rebels at the border. Evelyn would believe me, but she had no power. The council? But what if the traitors were on the council itself? As I slipped out of the records room and hurried back toward the safety of the guest quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that eyes were tracking my every move. That I'd just stumbled into something far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined, and I had no idea what to do about it. I couldn't stop thinking about those ledgers. For 2 days after my discovery in the records room, I tried to convince myself I'd misread the numbers, that there was a logical explanation for the discrepancies, that I was seeing patterns where none existed because I was stressed and worried and desperate for something to focus on other than Astrid fighting at the northern border. But I knew better. Someone was stealing from Dracarun, and whoever they were doing it carefully, methodically, covering their tracks with forged signatures and altered dates. I needed more proof. Something concrete that couldn't be explained away. So I went back. It was late afternoon when I slipped into the administrative wing again, checking carefully to make sure no one was watching. The records room door was unlocked, just as it had been before. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my heart pounding. This time, I knew what I was looking for. I started with the tax records, pulling ledgers from different years and comparing them. The pattern became clearer the more I looked. Money collected from the outer territories, substantial amounts, that somehow never made it into the royal treasury. The numbers had been changed, but whoever did it had been sloppy in places, missing small details that didn't add up. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. Tucked between 2 innocuous supply requisitions was a piece of parchment covered in symbols I didn't recognize at first. But as I studied it closer, I realized it was a code, a cipher, and in the margin, barely visible, someone had written a translation key. My hands shook as I worked through the message. It was correspondence, to someone outside the palace. Someone identified only as Northern Alpha. The message was brief but damning. The king marches north as planned. Iron Peak was the bait. Lead him deeper into the mountains. We will handle the rest from within. I stared at the parchment, my mind racing. The rebellion at Iron Peak hadn't been a random uprising. It had been orchestrated, planned, designed to lure Astrid away from the capital. But why? I kept searching, pulling more documents, my movements becoming frantic now. I found maps tucked into the back of a drawer, detailed charts of the northern territories with routes marked in red ink, ambush points, places where an army could be trapped and overwhelmed. They were planning to kill him. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about stealing supplies or money. This was about removing Astrid from power entirely. I found more coded messages, more correspondence with rogue alphas, promises of territory and power once the fiery king was dealt with. Plans for a new order in Dracarun, one where the High Circle would hold true power, and then I found the letters with my name on them. They were forgeries, I knew immediately. Letters supposedly written by me to various rebel groups, offering information about the king's movements, about palace security, about weaknesses in Dracarun's defenses. The handwriting was close to mine, but not quite right. Someone had studied my writing and done their best to copy it. They were framing me. I was meant to be the scapegoat. The half-blood girl who had bewitched the king, who had wormed her way into his confidence only to betray him to his enemies. When Astrid died in the mountains, they would produce these letters as proof. They would execute me as a traitor, and no one would question it because everyone already believed I was cursed, dangerous, unworthy. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. The elders had orchestrated everything. The rebellion, the ambush, my role as the villain in their carefully crafted story. I gathered everything I could carry, stuffing documents into the folds of my cloak. I needed to show someone, needed to prove what was happening before it was too late, but who could I trust? I thought of Evelyn. She would believe me. She had to. I was about to leave when I heard voices in the hallway outside. I froze, my heart stopping. "The records are all in order," a man's voice said. I recognized it immediately. Elder Corvus, the same elder who had questioned me with his cold eyes after the convergence. "She won't find anything unless she knows exactly where to look. And if she does?" Another voice. "Elder Marin. Then we deal with her, the same way we'll deal with her precious king." I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. They were right outside the door. "The poison is already prepared," Corvus continued. "When he returns victorious, believing he's crushed the rebellion, we'll host a feast in his honor. He'll never see it coming." "And the girl?" "An unfortunate accident. Perhaps she'll be found dead in her chambers, a suicide note confessing her treasonous acts beside her body, or maybe she'll simply disappear. Either way, she won't be a problem." My hands trembled. I looked around desperately for another way out, but there was only one door. I was trapped. The voices moved away down the corridor, and I waited, counting my racing heartbeats before I dared to move. When I finally crept to the door and peered out, the hallway was empty. I ran. I made it back to Evelyn's chambers, gasping for breath, and pounded on her door. She opened it immediately, her eyes widening when she saw my face. "Lysandra, what happened?" "You look terrified." I pushed past her into the room and closed the door, pressing my back against it. "I need your help. Please, you have to believe me." "Of course I believe you." "What's wrong?" I spread the documents on her table with shaking hands and told her everything, about the ledgers and the coded messages and the maps, about the plot to kill Astrid, about the forged letters framing me as a traitor. Evelyn's face grew paler with each revelation. When I finished, she sat down heavily, staring at the evidence in front of her. "The High Circle," she whispered. "They're planning a coup. They're going to kill him, Evelyn. They lured him north so they could ambush him, and even if he survives that, they're planning to poison him when he returns, and they're going to blame me for all of it. We have to warn him. Send a message to the Northern Front." "How?" "Every messenger goes through the council. They'll intercept anything we send, and even if we could get word to him, would he believe it? He barely knows me. For all he knows, I could be exactly what they're trying to make me appear to be." Evelyn stood and paced the room, her mind working. "Then we gather more proof. Evidence so solid that even the elders can't deny it. And we find someone we can trust, someone with power who can help us. Over the next 3 days, we worked carefully, quietly. Evelyn used her connections among the palace servants to gather information. I returned to the records room when I could, always careful, always watching for signs I'd been discovered. We found more evidence, more messages, more proof of the conspiracy. But we also realized how deep it went. It wasn't just the elders. Members of the council were involved, high-ranking nobles. Even some of the palace guard had been bought or blackmailed into cooperation. The rot went straight to the core of Dracarun's power structure. On the 4th night, I made a terrible mistake. I'd been following Elder Thorn, one of the younger members of the High Circle, hoping he might lead me to more evidence. He left the palace just after sunset, moving through the darkened streets of the capital with his hood pulled low. I followed him to the edge of the city, to an old warehouse near the docks. Light flickered through the gaps in the walls, voices carried on the night air. I crept closer, pressing myself against the rough wooden exterior, and peered through a crack in the wall. Elder Thorn stood inside, talking with a man I'd never seen before, but I recognized what he was immediately: a rogue wolf. I could see it in the way he moved, the feral gleam in his eyes, the lack of any pack markings or loyalty bonds. "Your Alpha has the location?" Thorn was saying. "The ambush point?" "He does," the rogue confirmed. "The Fiery King is walking straight into our trap. 3 more days, maybe 4, and he'll be dead in the mountains. Then you can claim he died a hero, fighting the rebellion he thought he was crushing. And his body will never be found, we'll make sure of that." Thorn smiled, a cold expression that made my skin crawl. "Perfect. And the half-blood girl? Once the king is dead, do what you want with her. My Alpha has no interest in palace politics, we just want what you promised. Territory, hunting rights, freedom from your precious kingdom's laws." "You'll have it all," Thorn assured him. "Once the king is gone and the High Circle controls the throne, we'll need allies like you, strong wolves who aren't afraid to do what's necessary." I should have left then, should have slipped away quietly with the information I'd gathered. But I shifted my weight, and my boots scraped against a loose stone. The sound echoed in the night like a thunderclap. Both men's heads snapped toward the wall where I was hiding. The rogue wolf's nostrils flared, and his eyes began to glow with predatory gold. "Someone's there," he growled. I ran. I heard them crash through the warehouse door behind me, heard their footsteps pounding after me through the darkened streets. My wolf surged inside me, lending me speed I didn't know I had, but they were faster, trained, dangerous. "Find her," Thorn's voice echoed off the stone buildings. "She can't escape. If she reaches the palace, we're done." I darted through alleyways, vaulted over crates, squeezed through narrow passages between buildings. My lungs burned. My legs screamed, but terror drove me forward. I could hear the rogue wolf getting closer, could hear his breathing, could almost feel his claws reaching for me. I burst out onto a main street and nearly collided with a palace patrol. 3 guards in royal armor, their hands immediately going to their weapons when they saw me running. "Help!" I gasped. "Please, they're chasing me, they're trying to kill me." The guards looked past me to where Thorn and the rogue had emerged from the alley. But instead of protecting me, instead of drawing their weapons, they simply stepped aside. "Let them pass," one of the guards said coldly. My blood turned to ice. They were part of it too. The corruption ran even deeper than I'd thought. Thorn smiled as he approached, no longer running now that he knew I was trapped. "Foolish girl. Did you really think you could spy on us and live?" "The king will know," I said desperately, backing away. "When he returns, I'll tell him everything. About you. About the coup. About all of it. The king," Thorn said with a laugh, "will be dead within 3 days. And you, my dear Lysandra, will die tonight. A tragic accident. Perhaps you'll be found in the river. Or maybe you simply vanished, overcome with guilt for your betrayal. Either way, you won't be telling anyone anything." The rogue wolf cracked his knuckles, advancing with a predator's patience. I looked around frantically for escape, but there was none. The guards blocked one direction, Thorn and the rogue blocked the other, solid walls on either side. I was going to die in this street, and no one would ever know the truth, unless I fought. My wolf surged inside me, stronger than she'd ever been, demanding I shift, demanding I fight, demanding I survive. I'd spent my whole life suppressing her, hiding her, ashamed of my half-blood nature. But right now, she was all I had. I felt my bones beginning to shift, felt my claws emerging, felt power flooding through my body as I prepared to make my final stand. Then a horn blast shattered the night. The sound came from the north gate, 3 sharp notes that echoed across the entire city. The king's return signal. Thorn's face went white. "That's impossible. He can't be back yet. The ambush, it was supposed to happen tomorrow." But the horn sounded again, followed by the thunder of hoofbeats. Torches appeared at the north gate, hundreds of them, as Astrid's army rode back into the capital. He'd returned early. He was alive, and I finally had a chance. I bolted past the confused guards before anyone could react, running toward the approaching army with every ounce of strength I had left. Behind me, I heard Thorn screaming orders to stop me, but it was too late. I burst through the crowd gathering to welcome the king home, pushing past celebrating citizens, until I saw him. Astrid sat atop a massive black horse at the head of his army, still in full battle armor, blood and dirt staining his cloak. His golden eyes scanned the crowd, and when they landed on me, sprinting toward him like my life depended on it, his expression shifted from confusion to alarm. I reached him and grabbed his stirrup, gasping for breath, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "They're trying to kill you. The elders. The High Circle. It's all a trap. The rebellion, the ambush, the poison. They're planning to murder you and frame me and take control of the kingdom. I have proof. I have evidence. Please, you have to believe me. Please." Astrid dismounted in one fluid motion, his hands gripping my shoulders, his eyes searching my face. "Lysandra, slow down. What are you talking about?" "A coup," I gasped. "The High Circle is planning a coup, and if they get to you first, you're going to die." Astrid didn't hesitate. The moment I finished my desperate explanation, gasping for breath in the middle of the crowded street, he turned to his generals with an expression that could have melted steel. "Secure the palace gates. No one enters or leaves without my direct permission. Find Evelyn and bring her to safety. And arrest any member of the High Circle you can find." His second-in-command, a scarred warrior named Gareth, nodded sharply. "Your Majesty, are you certain?" "The High Circle has served the throne for generations. They've been plotting treason," Astrid said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made even hardened soldiers straighten. "And if what Lysandra says is true, they've been doing it under my nose while I was away fighting their manufactured rebellion. Now move." The soldiers scattered to carry out his orders. Astrid's hand found my shoulder, steadying me as I swayed on my feet, exhaustion finally catching up with adrenaline. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I won't let them hurt you." But I wasn't safe. Neither of us were. Not yet. Within the hour, the palace was in controlled chaos. Astrid's loyal soldiers secured every entrance while others searched for the elders. Evelyn was brought to the throne room under guard, her face pale but relieved when she saw me alive. "Thank the gods," she breathed, pulling me into a fierce hug. "When you didn't come back, I thought they'd killed you." "They tried," I said, my voice shaking. "But Astrid came back early. If he'd been even one day later—" I didn't finish the sentence. We both knew what would have happened. Astrid called an emergency council meeting, but before it could convene, a messenger arrived with news that made my blood run cold. The High Circle had moved first. They'd called for a public tribunal in the throne hall. They'd sent criers through the city announcing that the half-blood girl who had bewitched their king would face justice for her crimes against Dracarun. They were forcing Astrid's hand, using the public nature of the accusation to corner him politically. If he didn't attend, he would appear weak. If he did attend, they would control the narrative. It was a trap, but we had no choice but to walk into it. The throne hall was packed when the guards escorted me inside. It seemed like every noble in the capital had come to witness my downfall. The massive chamber echoed with whispered conversations, and I felt hundreds of hostile eyes tracking my every movement. The High Circle sat in their elevated seats near the throne, their faces masks of righteous anger. Elder Corvus stood at the center, looking every inch the concerned advisor protecting his kingdom from a threat. I was brought to stand in the middle of the hall, alone, exposed. My hands were bound in front of me, not with rope but with ceremonial chains meant to symbolize my alleged crimes. The metal was cold against my wrists. Evelyn stood near the back of the crowd, her face anguished. She tried to push forward, tried to reach me, but palace guards held her back. Elder Corvus raised his hands, and the hall fell silent. "We are gathered here to address a grave threat to our kingdom," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive room. "This woman, Lysandra Hellwing, stands accused of heinous crimes against the crown and the people of Dracarun." I stood as straight as I could, refusing to show fear even though terror clawed at my chest. "She is accused," Corvus continued, "of seducing our king through unnatural means, of weakening his fire and his judgment, of passing vital secrets to rebel forces at our borders, and of conspiracy to commit treason against the throne itself. Gasps and angry mutters rippled through the crowd. I saw nobles shaking their heads in disgust. Saw warriors I'd passed in the hallways looking at me like I was something vile. She came to the great mating convergence uninvited, Elder Marin added, her voice sharp. A half-blood with no standing, no lineage, no right to be in the presence of pure-blooded wolves, yet somehow she caught the attention of our king. We believe she used dark magic, forbidden practices. She is a curse upon this kingdom. Firebane, someone in the crowd shouted. Others took up the cry, cursed! Half-blood stain! Execute her! My legs shook, but I kept my chin up. I would not cower, would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Evelyn finally broke through the guards holding her back. She rushed forward, her voice ringing out over the chaos. This is madness. Lysandra hasn't done anything wrong. She's innocent. 2 guards grabbed her arms, dragging her back. She struggled against them, tears streaming down her face. Silence! Corvus commanded. The friend of a traitor is not welcome to speak in this hall. Let her go, I said, finding my voice despite the fear choking me. She has nothing to do with this. Your quarrel is with me. Our quarrel, Elder Thorn said, stepping forward with a cold smile, is with anyone who threatens the stability of Dracarun. And you, girl, are the greatest threat we've faced in generations. The doors at the back of the hall crashed open. Everyone turned. The whispers died instantly. Astrid entered, and the air itself seemed to change. He was still in his battle armor, the black iron plates stained with blood and dirt from the fighting up north. His cloak was torn in places, his hair wild from the wind and war. He looked like exactly what he was, a warrior king fresh from battle, dangerous and barely controlled. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Those golden eyes burned with an intensity I'd never seen before, locked on me for one heartbeat before sweeping across the high circle with murderous focus. The crowd parted for him as he strode down the center aisle, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He stopped at the base of the throne, but he didn't sit. Instead, he crossed his arms and stood in a position that radiated lethal patience. Continue, he said, his voice deadly quiet. I'm listening. Elder Corvus seemed momentarily thrown by Astrid's early arrival, but he recovered quickly. Your Majesty, we were just explaining the charges against this woman. She has betrayed you, betrayed all of us. We have evidence of her correspondence with rebel forces, plans she shared, secrets she sold. Show me this evidence, Astrid said. Corvus produced the forged letters, the ones I'd seen in the records room. The ones written in handwriting that almost matched mine. He held them up for the crowd to see. These letters prove her treachery. In her own hand, she offers information to our enemies. She promises them aid in exchange for power and position once you are overthrown. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. I saw faces twisted with hatred, heard calls for my immediate execution. Through it all, Astrid stood silent, watching. His expression was unreadable, but I saw his jaw tighten, saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. The evidence is clear, Elder Marin said. She is guilty of high treason. We recommend immediate execution as an example to others who might think to betray the crown. Exile would be too merciful, Thorn added. She must die, tonight, in front of the entire kingdom. The elders looked at Astrid expectantly, waiting for his judgment. The crowd held its breath. Astrid's aura began to build. I felt it like heat washing over my skin, saw the flames in the braziers flare higher. The very air seemed to vibrate with his barely contained rage. But before he could speak, before he could pronounce my fate, something inside me broke. I'd spent my entire life being quiet, being invisible, accepting what others said about me because I believed I deserved it. Half-blood, unworthy, cursed, but I wasn't any of those things, and I wasn't going to die for crimes I didn't commit. I stepped forward, my chains rattling, my voice clear and strong despite my fear. I have proof. The hall fell silent. Elder Corvus's face paled. What? I have proof, I repeated louder now. Proof that the High Circle is lying. Proof that you've been stealing from this kingdom. Proof that you orchestrated the rebellion to lure the king into an ambush. Proof that you're planning a coup. She's desperate, Marin said quickly. Making wild accusations to save her own life. Then let her speak, Astrid said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Let's hear what she has to say. I looked at him, and he gave me the smallest nod. Trust flickering in his golden eyes despite everything. Evelyn understood immediately. She'd been holding my cloak, the one I'd stuffed full of documents before I ran. She pushed through the crowd again and handed it to me, the guards too shocked to stop her this time. I pulled out the ledgers, the maps, the coded messages. I spread them across the floor in front of the throne for everyone to see. These are records from the palace archives, I said, my voice steady now. They show years of theft, supplies meant for villages that never arrived, taxes collected that never reached the treasury. Money diverted to pay off rogue alphas and fund rebellions. Gasps echoed through the hall. Nobles leaned forward to see. These are coded messages between the High Circle and rebel forces, I continued, holding up the decoded correspondence. Plans for ambushes, instructions for leading the king into traps, promises of power and territory once he was dead. Lies! Corvus shouted. She forged those documents. Did I also forge these? I pulled out the maps showing planned ambush locations, the same maps I'd found in the records room. These are in Elder Thorn's handwriting. I've seen his signatures on official documents. The script is identical. Thorn's face went white. And did I forge this? I held up a small vial that Evelyn had managed to steal from an elder's chamber. Poison, meant for the victory feast you were planning to hold in the king's honor when he returned. Except he wasn't supposed to return, he was supposed to die in the mountains. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. Even the nobles who had been calling for my death now looked uncertain, their eyes moving between me and the elders. This is absurd, Corvus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Your Majesty, surely you don't believe the ravings of this half-blood girl over the council that has served your family for generations. Astrid's eyes blazed with fury. The temperature in the hall rose as his power surged, unchecked now. The braziers roared to life, flames shooting toward the ceiling. The stone pillars actually trembled. And then he turned on the High Circle with a look that promised death. I'd never seen anything like the rage that rolled off Astrid in that moment. His aura filled the throne hall like a physical force, pressing down on everyone present. Nobles stumbled backward. Guards dropped to one knee. Even the High Circle elders, who moments before had been so confident in their accusations, now looked terrified. You plot against your king? Astrid's voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the massive hall. Each word fell like a hammer blow. You steal from your people. You manufacture rebellions and send warriors to die in battles you orchestrated. You lure me into ambushes meant to kill me. He descended from the throne platform slowly, deliberately. Every step echoed in the silence. And you dare blame my mate? The last word reverberated through the hall like thunder. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. I stopped breathing. My mind struggled to process what he'd just said. Mate. He'd called me his mate. Publicly. In front of the entire kingdom. The High Circle looked like they'd been struck. Even Elder Corvus, who always had something to say, stood speechless. Astrid crossed the floor to where I stood in chains. His golden eyes met mine, and I saw something fierce and protective burning there. Something that made my wolf howl, with recognition inside my chest. He reached out and broke the ceremonial chains with his bare hands, the metal snapping like dry twigs. Then he took my hand, his touch warm and deliberate, and pulled me to stand beside him. Not behind him, not below him. Beside him. This is Lysandra Hellwing, he announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. My chosen, my equal, my Luna. The crowd exploded into chaos. Gasps and shouts and exclamations of shock echoed off the stone walls. I heard someone crying, heard others arguing, heard the moon priests beginning to murmur among themselves. But Astrid wasn't finished. He turned back to the High Circle, his hand still gripping mine, and the fury in his expression made even the bravest warriors take a step back. You called her a curse. You called her Firebane. You tried to frame her for treason while planning to murder me and seize control of my throne. His voice dropped to something cold and lethal. And you thought I wouldn't find out. Your Majesty, Corvus tried, his voice shaking now. We were trying to protect you. The prophecy says my true mate shall calm the flames or burn the kingdom to ash, Astrid interrupted. You twisted those words to justify your treachery. You tried to use ancient warnings as an excuse to commit murder. He raised his free hand, and palace guards immediately surrounded the high circle platform. The elders tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. "Arrest them," Astrid commanded. "All of them. Every elder, every noble, every guard who participated in this conspiracy. Find them. Drag them from their hiding places. Throw them in the deepest cells we have." The throne hall descended into controlled chaos as soldiers moved to obey. Elder Corvus began shouting protests, claiming his actions were lawful, that he was protecting the kingdom. Elder Marin screamed curses at me, calling me a witch and a demon. Elder Thorn tried to fight the guards and was struck down, his face pressed against the stone floor. Through it all, Astrid kept hold of my hand, anchoring me, protecting me. The loyal wolves in the hall, the ones who had always served the throne faithfully, began to kneel. First one, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. The entire hall filled with the sound of armor clanking and cloaks rustling as warriors and nobles alike dropped to one knee in recognition. Not in fear, not in obligation, but in respect. Evelyn pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She reached me and pulled me into a fierce hug, sobbing with relief. "I thought we'd lost," she whispered. "I thought they were going to kill you." "I'm okay," I managed, my voice shaking. "I'm okay." The moon priests moved forward, their ancient faces solemn. The eldest among them raised his staff, and the hall quieted again. "The prophecy," he intoned, his voice carrying with the weight of centuries. "The one who calms the flames has arrived." The other priests took up the chant, their voices rising and falling in an ancient rhythm I didn't understand but felt in my bones. "For generations we have waited. For generations the fiery kings of Dracarun have burned alone, their power unchecked, their rage barely controlled. But the prophecy promised one who could calm the flames without extinguishing them, one who could stand beside the fire without being consumed." The head priest looked at me, and his eyes were kind despite their age. "You are that one, Lysandra Hellwing. The mate bond has chosen you. The kingdom recognizes you. The fire has found its balance." I couldn't speak. Could barely think. Everything that had happened in the last hour felt surreal, like a dream I might wake from at any moment. But Astrid's hand in mine was real. The warmth of his presence beside me was real. And when he turned to look at me, the intensity in his golden eyes was absolutely real. "I choose you," he said quietly, meant only for me despite the hundreds watching. "Whether the kingdom burns or not, whether the prophecy is fulfilled or fails, I choose you, Lysandra." My throat tightened with emotion. "Even though I'm half-blood? Even though I'm nobody?" "You're not nobody." His free hand came up to cup my face, gentle despite his warrior's calluses. "You're the woman who sat beside me when everyone else stood. You're the one who uncovered a conspiracy that could have destroyed my kingdom. You're the one who scented a bond I didn't believe existed and made me question everything I thought I knew about fate and destiny." Tears blurred my vision. "I'm scared." "So am I," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out together." The last of the treacherous elders were dragged from the hall, their screams fading into the distance. The guards sealed the doors behind them, and slowly, gradually, the atmosphere in the throne hall began to shift. The tension that had gripped the room like a vice began to ease. The fear that had made everyone hold their breath started to dissipate, and something new took its place. Hope. I felt it spreading through the gathered wolves like warmth through cold stone. Saw it in the faces of nobles who had been prepared to watch my execution, heard it in the whispers that started to replace the earlier cries for my death. The prophecy is fulfilled. The fiery king has found his Luna. The kingdom is saved. Astrid raised his voice one final time, addressing the entire hall. The High Circle's corruption ends today. Their theft ends today. Their manipulation and their schemes and their plots end today. His aura surged again, but this time it felt different. Not threatening, but protective. From this moment forward, Dracarun will be rebuilt on truth and loyalty. Any who participated in the conspiracy will face justice. Any who remained loyal will be rewarded. And any who doubt the strength of this kingdom should know this. We are stronger now than we have ever been. He pulled me closer, and I felt every eye in the hall on us. Because the fire, he said, his voice dropping but still carrying to every corner, has finally found its balance. The hall erupted in cheers, not forced, not frightened, but genuine, relieved, hopeful cheers that shook the rafters and made the braziers dance. I stood beside the fiery Alpha King, his hand in mine, and realized something profound. The kingdom wasn't burning. Instead, for the first time in generations, it was breathing again. The corruption that had choked it was being cut away. The fear that had paralyzed it was lifting. The lies that had poisoned it were being exposed to light. And somehow, impossibly, I was part of that healing. Me, Lysandra Hellwing, the quiet half-blood scholar who had only wanted to remain invisible. Astrid leaned down and whispered in my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "Are you ready for this? For everything that comes with being Luna?" I looked out at the sea of faces. At Evelyn, who was crying and smiling at the same time. At the moon priests, who watched with approval. At the loyal wolves who knelt not in fear but in devotion. And I looked up at Astrid, at the man who had chosen me despite everything, who had defended me when the entire kingdom turned against me, who had called me his mate in front of everyone who mattered. "I don't know," I admitted honestly, "but I'll try, if you'll help me." "Always," he promised. And standing there in that throne hall, surrounded by the flickering light of 100 braziers, I finally allowed myself to believe it. The prophecy that had terrified so many had come true. The fiery king's true mate had calmed the flames, and instead of burning the kingdom to ash, together we were going to help it rise from the ashes of corruption into something stronger than it had been before. The kingdom of Dracarun had found its balance, and I had found my home. The days after the tribunal passed in a blur of chaos and healing. With the High Circle arrested and their conspiracy exposed, everything they'd built began to crumble. The rebellion at the northern border collapsed within 2 days, once the rogue alphas realized their promised support would never come. Without the elders' gold and weapons, the rebels scattered back into the mountains, leaderless and defeated. Astrid's generals found the stolen grain in warehouses throughout the capital, hidden under false records and guarded by corrupted officials. Within a week, convoys were rolling out to the starving villages in the north and east, carrying the supplies that should have reached them months ago. I watched from the palace windows as the wagons departed, and for the first time since this all began, I felt like I could breathe. The border packs that had been wavering in their loyalty, uncertain whether to side with the rebels or the throne, sent envoys to swear their allegiance. They knelt before Astrid in the throne hall, pledging their warriors and their territory to Dracarun's defense. Peace, fragile but real, began to spread across the kingdom like dawn breaking after a long night, and somehow, impossibly, I became part of that peace. The people started calling me the Flame Calmer. The title spread through the capital like wildfire, whispered in markets and taverns, sung in songs by traveling bards. Wherever I walked in the palace, servants bowed. Nobles who had called me cursed just days before now sought my favor. Warriors who had demanded my execution now pledged their loyalty to their new Luna. It was overwhelming, terrifying, surreal. I'd gone from invisible to infamous to revered in the span of a week, and I didn't know how to process any of it. On the 8th night after the tribunal, after another long day of court proceedings and loyalty oaths and careful political maneuvering, I couldn't take it anymore. The palace felt too small, too crowded, too full of eyes watching my every move. I needed air, space. A moment to think without someone asking me questions or seeking my guidance or treating me like I was something precious and breakable. So I slipped away. The torchlit courtyard was quiet, the stones still warm from the day's heat. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting silver light across the training yard and the gardens beyond. I found a bench near the far wall and sat down, wrapping my arms around myself. I'd saved the kingdom. I'd exposed the conspiracy. I'd stood beside the fiery Alpha King and accepted the mate bond in front of everyone. So why did I feel so lost? I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, familiar. "You ran again." Astrid's voice came from the shadows. I didn't turn around. I needed to think. "You needed to escape." I couldn't deny it. He knew me too well already, this man who had upended my entire world. He came around the bench and sat beside me, close enough that I could feel his warmth but not touching. For a long moment we sat in silence, both staring up at the moon. "They're calling me the Flame Calmer," I said finally. "I know. I don't feel like I've calmed anything. I feel like I barely survived. Like I stumbled through everything and somehow came out the other side through sheer luck. That's not how it looked from where I was standing, Astrid said quietly. You uncovered a conspiracy that had been growing for years. You gathered evidence that no one else noticed. You risked your life to warn me. You stood in that throne hall, chained and accused, and you fought back when anyone else would have broken. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. I turned to look at him then. He was still in his formal clothing from the day's court sessions, but he'd removed the crown and loosened his collar. He looked tired. Human. Vulnerable in a way I rarely saw. Are you okay? I asked softly. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I should be asking you that. I asked first. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he chose his words carefully. I trusted them, he said finally. The High Circle. I was raised to trust them. My father trusted them. My grandfather. They've advised the throne for generations, and I never questioned whether their counsel was truly in the kingdom's best interest or their own. He turned to face me fully. You saw what I couldn't, or wouldn't. You saved my life, Lysandra. You saved my kingdom. And I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. He reached out and cupped my face in both his hands. The gesture gentle, despite his warrior's strength. You didn't just cool my fire, you saved my soul. The words hit me like a physical thing, stealing my breath. I saw the truth in his golden eyes, the depth of emotion he rarely showed. This fierce, powerful king who ruled through strength and fire was looking at me like I was the most precious thing in his world. Astrid, I whispered. I spent my whole life believing I was meant to burn alone, he continued, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. I thought the fire inside me was a curse I had to bear in isolation, that letting anyone close would only hurt them. But then you sat beside me in that throne hall, and everything changed. I felt my eyes burning with tears. I don't understand this bond. I don't understand why fate chose me for you. Maybe fate knew I needed someone who would see past the crown and the power and the fire, someone who would call me out when I was wrong. Someone brave enough to stand beside me without fear. He leaned his forehead against mine, and I felt his aura surrounding us, not the raging inferno from the throne hall, but something warm and gentle and safe. Someone exactly like you. And in that moment, something inside me finally settled. All my life, I'd felt like I was caught between two worlds, too human for the wolves, too wolf for the humans, never quite belonging anywhere, always on the outside looking in. But here, in this courtyard, with this man's hands cradling my face and his warmth surrounding me, I finally understood. I didn't need to be one thing or the other. I didn't need to hide part of myself to be accepted. I could be both. I could be whole. I could be his. I accept, I whispered. The bond. You. All of it. I accept. The moment the words left my lips, something shifted. The mate bond that had been crackling between us since that first moment in the throne hall suddenly snapped into place with a force that took my breath away. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before. Deep and warm and soul-binding. It connected us in a way that went beyond physical touch, beyond words, beyond anything I could explain. I felt his emotions as clearly as my own, his relief, his joy, his fierce protectiveness. And I knew he felt mine too. His eyes widened, and I saw wonder there. Wonder and completion, and something that looked like peace. Lysandra, he breathed my name like a prayer. I feel you, I whispered. I feel everything. So do I. He kissed me then, gentle and reverent like I was something sacred, and maybe to him I was, his mate, his Luna. The one who had calmed his fire and saved his kingdom, and stood beside him when the world tried to tear us apart. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless, he stood and offered me his hand. Come with me. I took his hand without hesitation, and together we walked back toward the palace. The torches lit our path, casting dancing shadows on the stone. Our fingers intertwined, the mate bond humming between us like a song only we could hear. When we entered the throne hall, we found it wasn't empty. The loyal nobles, the generals, the moon priests, even the servants they'd gathered as though they'd known we would come. As though they'd been waiting for this moment. And as Astrid and I walked down the center aisle hand in hand, they knelt. Not in fear, not in obligation, but in devotion. Every wolf in that hall lowered themselves in respect, not just for their king but for both of us, the fiery alpha king and the quiet half-blood girl who had somehow tamed him. The head moon priest raised his staff, his ancient voice carrying through the hall. The prophecy is fulfilled, the flames are calmed, the kingdom is whole. I looked at Astrid and he looked at me, and I saw reflected in his golden eyes the same wonder I felt in my own heart. We had done it. Against all odds, against the conspiracy and the corruption and everyone who said it was impossible, we had done it. The kingdom of Dracarun was healing. The stolen supplies were reaching the starving villages. The rebellions were crushed. The borders were secure. Peace was spreading like light, driving back darkness. And the fiery king's mate, the one prophesied to either calm the flames or burn the kingdom to ash, had chosen to heal instead of destroy. As we stood there, surrounded by kneeling wolves and flickering firelight, I finally understood my place in this world. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I wasn't half of anything. I was whole. I was Luna. I was his. And he was mine. The prophecy was fulfilled. The kingdom was healed. And the fire that had burned alone for so long was finally, blessedly, at peace.